I think it is so important to understand first and foremost that the scientific consensus on the fires is that they were caused by dry vegetation, high Santa Ana winds, low humidity, plus only 1/5 of an inch of rainfall since July 2024. So that is the main reason why these brush fires have spread so rapidly and are so difficult to contain. As Rachel's already said, this has been so politicized with political operatives, I would point out on both sides with this Operation Blame the Black Woman, as though she could have done some Herculean effort to stop these wildfires and she chose not to. So they're using disinformation and out of context claims. And while I agree that our primary focus must absolutely remain on aiding those affected by the fires, we have to counteract false narratives because there's a cumulative impact of these false narratives being repeated. And if we are days and weeks late in responding to them, then it's too late to undo some of this damage. So I want to talk about the main attacks on Mayor Bass. And I'm going to have to speak with a little bit more precision than people probably want to hear in this moment. But I think it's important because a lot of what's happening in terms of the attacks on Mayor Bass are playing with the semantics and taking things out of context. So when there's talk about the $17 million cut from the LAFD budget, what they're talking about is a departmental cut. What they're leaving out, and which has been mentioned more frequently in recent days, is that $53 million was being book kept in a non-departmental budget. So as a result of bookkeeping it in different buckets, it is a cut in the departmental budget, but it is not a cut in what they are allowed to spend overall. And according to the latest reporting, this is from the city administrative officer that showed this, LAFD is projected to spend $90 million more than they are budgeted at the departmental level for fiscal year 24-25. So all of this conversation about a cut that refuses to acknowledge that, and I'm not saying this as a criticism, this is just a quantitative reality, that they are not adhering to the cut is terribly misleading, because the reality is, and this is how budgeting works, just real quick, 101. A budget is put out, a department, they ask for the stars, the moon and the stars and everything they can. And in negotiations, you get what you get. And you either ask permission to say, can I please spend more? Please, I need more money. And I make a case, which is what Chief Crawley did in her 12-4 memo, or you ask forgiveness. Well, I spent the money. You got to figure out how to pay for it. And that's the ask forgiveness part. So the projected overspending is at $90 million. And that's including the $53 million when you take into account that that is in a separate bucket. Prior to Chief Crawley's memo, and I'm not saying this to criticize her, I'm just saying this to just put some more facts out there. The first financial status report from the city administrative officer pointed out that they were projected to overrun, which means spend more money than they were allotted in their budget, to the tune of $32 million. So that was weeks before her memo. They were already projecting an overrun. Her memo doesn't mention that. The excess spending covered things like fleet maintenance, expanded wildfire deployment, and sending firefighters out of state to respond to Hurricane Helene. So it doesn't really ring true that you were so pressed for resources to support the city of LA, yet you had the capacity to send firefighters out of state to respond to Hurricane Helene. Obviously, admirable, necessary activities, but I'm just saying, do the math here. So we just have to understand that budgeting is complex. You have revenues, you have expenses. And there's a dance that is done, and a lot of people don't understand this, where you have to try to tick and tie things. And in the process, some people spend more, some people spend less. And I'll just put this in another way. I think we all have worked for companies, especially in the past several years, where by the end of the year, you get to the end of the year and they say, okay, those of you can't get new computers, no more training classes, no more conferences, business conferences. If there are vacant positions, don't hire for them. So those are the kinds of things that happen at the city level as well. But what I will say is that historically, this chief has overrun her budget. In the prior year, she overran it by $66 million. And now this year, they're projecting $90 million. So I just want to put to bed the idea that the fire department is not spending what they need to spend in order to support the residents. In the same way that this is projected to be the most expensive fire response in history for the state of California. You spend to do what you got to do. And then two other things I just want to highlight. I know I'm a little bit over on time. Is I know people have been saying, well, what about the LA controller who is talking about these budget cuts? Well, that person is not acknowledging what I've said now multiple times, that the expenditures, what they're spending, is far exceeding the budget. And it's really interesting to me that he is not making that distinction when he was on a mission to highlight the difference between the budgeting for the homelessness problem and the spending. In that case, the spending was lower. So he very well understands the difference between what's budgeted and what gets actually spent. His own department is overspending to their budget. So he's not acting in good faith either by not acknowledging the fact that the projected spending for the fire department is higher. And then I just, since Rachel mentioned Rick Caruso, for the progressives that are attacking Karen Bass, Mayor Karen Bass, saying that she cut money here and she put it here, let's just be very clear. Rick Caruso, who spent over $100 million to beat and lose to Mayor Karen Bass, was absolutely not the person who, if he were in this same position, would have cut the police department budget. He was endorsed by the police union. He wanted to hire 1,500 more police officers. And he was also totally against cutting any kind of funding to the police department. So all of the experts who are actually not trying to politicize this agree that even a fully funded department would have struggled to contain these extreme wind conditions. The Los Angeles Fire Commission president, Janethia Huntley-Hayes, said, I don't see how anybody could have prepared for this. Robert Hawkins, who is president of the Los Angeles City Centurions, who supports the Black firefighters, said that he does not believe the budget impacted the department's ability to fight the wildfires. And the last thing I just want to say is that regarding the political fallout from this, I know that people are trying to organize a change.org petition for a recall. I just want to be very clear. The hostility and volume of attacks are not the same as momentum against Mayor Karen Bass. 289,000 verified signatures that have to be collected from registered Los Angeles city voters in order to start a recall. That is not what's happening right now. It is just a change.org petition. Anybody can sign it. So I just want to make sure that we understand where the momentum is. I think that we are thankfully gearing up behind Mayor Bass, and we're going to push back against these things, but we have to understand the different nuances in order to effectively push back.